My dear friends, a strange game of destiny wanted the Iranians in 1979 for the second time in history to be the witnesses to another Muslim invasion and consequently the destruction of their culture and their identity. This catastrophe was a direct consequence of the first devastating Arab Muslim invasion of Persia in 7th century that had drained Iranians of their historical memory. They became an amnesiac nation, people without memory. Slowly, gradually, the Persian history, culture, and civilization that had been shining over the world during 1,300 years from 6th century to BC to 7th century after Christ faded away and were replaced by the Islamized Arab culture. The darkness that covered Iran after the second Muslim invasion in 1979, unlike the first one, triggered out an extraordinary and powerful reaction, completely unexpected. And this reaction was an unprecedented awakening of historical consciousness, particularly among the young generation called the burned generation or lost generation. 1,400 years of a deep amnesia is now going to be replaced by an illuminating awareness. The unanswered questions that had been buried for centuries in the people's collective subconscious now are reappearing. Who am I? What happened to me? What happened to us? What happened to this country once again? These questions and many others were the main reason that motivated a group of the best scholars and researchers scattered around the world to go with serenity and open eyes deep into the ashes of 4,000 years of Persian history in order to find and bring up to our century the humanistic and progressive values and powerful symbols of that culture. Then try to give them life, energy, and force in a consistent and livable system. During the search among these values and symbols, the most powerful and the most valuable of all that we found and recognized was the Zarathustra's sublime book called the Gathas. This book was composed about 4,000 years ago, and since the discovery of its forgotten language in the late 18th century, it had been considered as one of the fundamental pillars of the world culture. It became the golden key to open what we were looking for. Now let us see what the Gathas are about. Zarathustra, who was born and bred in the east of Iran around 3,700 years ago, announced the core of his doctrine or existential philosophy in form of 17 songs called the Gathas. At that faraway time, there was no adequate method of writing his words, nor any other means of recording them. Added to this problem, the Zarathustra's language, that was an Aryan language, the forefather of many European languages, Persian and Sanskrit, in which he had proclaimed his doctrine, the Gathas, was completely forgotten for about 2,000 years, to the extent that during this very long period, not a single word has been missed. During this very long period, not a phrase could be understood. Yet, strangely, not a single word has been missed or added or displaced. His words have reached to us in their original and unaltered purity of thought. We have to admit that this is a real phenomenon in the history of ideas and civilizations. In fact, the Zarathustra's followers and disciples learned the Gathas as sacred songs by heart and passed them down as an oral tradition from one generation to the next. Learning them by heart was relatively easy, as they were in form of songs with meters and poetic rhythm. In the 3rd century, the Zoroastrian priests in Iran created an extremely sophisticated alphabetic system of writing able to capture and fix all the nuances, accents, and pronunciations of this long forgotten language. Even though the Gathas could not yet be understood, the written words could, however, be vocalized phonetically as sacred songs and sang as sacred songs in the temples. 1,500 years later, in the 18th century, the French linguist Anquetil Duperron, who was working among the Zoroastrians of India called the Parsis, made an extremely important discovery. He noticed that the language of the Gathas looked strangely similar to Sanskrit, the sacred language of India. This was the language in which the Indian religious book Rig Veda had been written, and which had been also recently discovered. This similarity between Sanskrit and the Gathas offered the key to the deciphering the Gathas. Eventually, with hugely painstaking efforts, the language of the Gathas, after almost 2,000 years, was deciphered. Even though the content appeared to be very difficult for an accurate translation, inevitably many errors and mistakes crept into the translations. The decipherment of the Gathas provoked extremely passionate discussions among philosophers and writers in all over Europe. In France, Voltaire and Diderot, in attacking Duperron, showed how much confusion and ignorance on Zarathustra was still deep and persistent. In England, the famous Orientalist William Jones called Duperron a charlatan, and the Catholic Church threatened Duperron of excommunication because the Church thought that the European intellectuals have found a weapon against the power of the Church in the Zoroastrian texts. They were saying that as from now, the Church cannot claim having the monopoly of truth. The truth can also be found in a non-Christian tradition much older than Christianity. In this battle, many other linguists and Orientalists interfered, and finally the Gathas became an academic subject taught in all big universities. During the past 200 years, a great number of linguists and researchers from different countries have been working hard on the Gathas texts, and every single word of this sublime book has been the subject of passionate debates and innumerable papers and books, and many books have been written on them. Now, let us see the existential philosophy, spirituality, and worldview in the Gathas. In these songs, Zarathustra presents not only for the first time a revolutionary concept, the monotheism, in order to break the existing order, the polytheism that has always been, but he equally introduced another revolutionary concept, and it was the happiness and realization of a happy life on this earth. On the top of the Zarathustra system, there is a supreme being called Ahura Mazda. That means the existence who possesses great knowledge or wisdom. He or she, because Ahura Mazda is has both masculine and feminine quality. He or she is mentioned in the Gathas more than 300 times. All Zarathustra's existential philosophy in the Gathas will be based on two precepts or pillars. The first one is, the aim of our life is to live a happy and joyful existence on this earth. And the second pillar is, the purpose of our creation is to take part actively in improving this world so that all living beings, humans, animals, and plants live in peace, fulfillment, and flourish. This principle, astonishingly modern, is expressed and developed more than 3,700 years ago. From the first stanza of the first song of the Gathas, Zarathustra expresses his desire to lead the earth to happiness. With uplifted arms, O Mazda, I pray, and humbly ask for happiness. May all my actions be attuned with wisdom and good thought, and in harmony with the law of righteousness, that I may please you and bring happiness to the soul of the earth. Thus, O Mazda Ahura, I come to you with good thought, so that I may learn through righteousness the joy of both worlds, the physical and that of the mind. In this way, I may lead my companions to happiness. This is the Gatha Song 1, stanza 1. But here, how to achieve happiness on this earth, while Zarathustra knows neither the mechanism nor the laws of the conditions of its realization. He doesn't know anything about happiness because he is the first person, the first human being on this earth that we know in history that says we are not born to suffer and to die. We are born to set up a happy life and spread this happiness on earth. This concept of happiness is just an idea that has filled his mind. He's facing a sea of questions and doubts. He wants to know the workings of a happy life in order to make others happy. But at the same time, he hears every day the suffering cries of the earth that begs for a moment of happiness. In the first stanza of the second song, he describes it this way. The soul of Mother Earth cries and complains to you. Why did you create me? Who fashioned me this way? Anger, cruelty, and aggression oppresses me. And no one but you has the power to shield me, lead me to real happiness. Guide me to real happiness. But what is it, that real happiness? What is it made of? What is its nature? Where is source? Why so much suffering, sickness, and anguish on this earth? Why death, separation, and grief? Ahura Mazda, is it not the only God capable of creating happiness and joy? But then, who created the dark side of existence? Who established this unjust law that living beings must kill and eat other living beings to survive? Is there another God, a God of evil? Zarathustra asked himself. No, it is not possible, he said. There must be another reason and another mystery to be discovered. With these questionings and doubts, Zarathustra set off in search for the laws that allow him to understand the reason of happiness and suffering. Continuing his way and engaging in long periods of observation, reflection, and meditation, Zarathustra discovers one of the fundamental laws of existence, that of the dichotomy of forces and phenomena. He noted that any force or any phenomenon have meaning only in relation to the force and the phenomenon to which they are directly opposed. Thus, the serenity without anxiety, justice without injustice, love without hate, truth without lies, good without evil, happiness without pain, joy without sorrow, etc., make no sense. He says we are living in a world of dualities, that nothing has meaning without its opposite. Following the discovery of this first fundamental law, he discovered the second fundamental law, which is each element of these pairs of opposites represents one, a positive aspect which leads beings to happiness, and the other negative, which leads to suffering. This law is very interesting since it leads Zarathustra to identify the nature of the various components of happiness, but also of the different components of pain. However, Zarathustra wants to learn more. He wants to know, where do they rise, this dual phenomena? Where do they come from? Who does create them? How to control them? He soon discovers the third fundamental law of existence, which says these phenomena, such as good and evil, are not cosmic. That is to say, they are not inherent in the creation of the world, because in the areas not inhabited, good and evil, happiness and suffering, joy and sadness, etc., make no sense. In the moon, where nobody is living, good and bad have no meaning. They take their meaning and become effective only with respect to human beings and living things in general. Zarathustra then understands that all these phenomena are born in the mind, which is called mana in Gothic terms, or are perceived by thought and will be engraved in the consciousness that he calls dhyana. Therefore, the Zoroastrian dualism of the Gathas, that absolutely must not be confused with that of Avesta, is an ethical dualism, which has meaning only at the level of human thought. It is not cosmic, because there is no dualism in the uninhabited universe. In the Gathas, this is said in several songs, including the third song as follows, as I read in stanza 1 to 4. Listen now as I speak to you, to those of you who have come to seek wisdom, and those who have already found it. Hear then of the two basic principles. But first, let us pay tribute to Ahura and good thought, and revere righteousness, so that you may see the light and attain with the right choice contentment and bliss. Thus, before you are led through the great event of choice, hear only the best with your ears, and see with eyes of your wisdom. Then each of you, man and woman, with discernment, choose one of the two paths that are the two basic ways of thinking. Of these two basic minds that in the beginning had been conceived as twins and born in thought, one represents good and the other evil. Between these two, the wise choose good and the ignorant evil. And when at the first these two opposing minds came together, they created life and no life. Thus, until the end of time, the poorest existence shall be for the wicked, and the richest for the righteous. In these stanzas, and some other stanzas of the Gathas, also the notion of non-life is complex and requires a different, I think, a different clip. Zarathustra brings the fourth fundamental law of existence, namely the freedom of choice. The freedom to choose at any moment between the positive and negative aspects of dual and opposing phenomena that I mentioned earlier. Choosing between joy and sadness, between happiness and suffering, between love and hate, between serenity and anxiety, and short, between good and evil. Therefore, in the existential philosophy of Zarathustra, good represents all the forces that lead to achieving a happy and joyful life, and evil are the forces that impede the realization of such a life. But how to discern between good and evil? Is there any instrument and tool or a faculty in order to make such a distinction? Zarathustra called this instrument wisdom, that comes from the word khratu in the Gathas. Extremely important concept and even capital in Zoroastrian doctrine. It is so important that Zarathustra has named his God, God of wisdom, Ahura Mazda, God of wisdom. But what is wisdom? In the Zoroastrian view, what is certain, wisdom has nothing to do with college degrees or formal education. Wisdom is a faculty, a force, or a tool which was born from the birth of the person, and if society allows, it develops and becomes operative and usable by their holders. If the society is repressive, wisdom is stifled and remains inoperative. For Zarathustra, the wisdom is superior to any form of knowledge. Knowledge that is not led by the wisdom is destructive, while a knowledge which is led by the wisdom contributes to the happiness of people. Thus, wisdom is the instrument that can distinguish between good and evil, knowing that the good represents forces that lead to happiness and evil forces which follow the opposite direction. Therefore, man can choose between two forms of thought that lead to two ways of living, good or bad, happy or sad, etc. This is why Zarathustra in the previous stanza speak of the great event of choice, because choosing their lifestyle, beliefs and preferences is a big event in life. However, many human beings on this earth take this choice lightly, or simply their society prohibits them from having a choice. The right to choose in the Gatha is a fundamental right. It is the essential component of happiness. But this freedom to choose also means that everyone is responsible for the way he chooses his happiness or unhappiness. This responsibility gives meaning to human existence, which is to achieve a happy life. It also indicates a direction which is that of Ahura Mazda to help correct the imperfections of the world. However, that happiness must be shared, not only with other human beings, but also with animals and plants, because one cannot be happy in an unhappy society. In several songs, Zarathustra emphasizes this fact. For example, the first two stanzas of the eighth song begins as follows. Ahura Mazda set the principles of existence in such a way that happiness is for the one who makes others happy. Thus, O righteousness, for the spread of this eternal doctrine, grant me the power of body and mind, so I can, in the radiance of serenity, set the foundation for a happy life. Because the best life is for the one who turns towards radiant energy and sheds light on others. Thus, O Ahura Mazda, with your infinite wisdom and in the radiance of righteousness, show us the knowledge risen from good thought, so that our life would be long and filled with joy and happiness every day. Those were the song number 8, stanza 1 to 2. Zarathustra, who has discovered the mechanism and the nature of happiness, and sharing that happiness, asks himself now a relevant question. Is this happiness so found and obtained? Is it sustainable? Let's not forget, he started his quest in search of what he called the true happiness. That is to say, a happiness that will last forever, even beyond the material world. For happiness once obtained on the earth must necessarily continue its evolution in the spiritual world, Manahiya, he calls it, in the Gathas, at the level of consciousness Da'ina, which is eternal. Indeed, for Zarathustra, true happiness does not depend on an act of will and intellectual or reasoning. It comes from a specific viewpoint on life, built over time in a specific cultural system, and through which we understand and interpret the events we face. A short look through the 17 songs of the Gathas shows clearly how Zarathustra creates the specific viewpoint on life within a very sophisticated cultural and spiritual system. His approach is astonishingly modern, one can say timeless. It is based on stimulating the thought, awakening the brain, widening the refreshing one's outlook on life.